All right, so I'm going to read this and kind of break down the other tasks that it's asking you to do. It's the one about flying in space, and it is the learning module for this current week. And if you want to open the PDF and follow along with me as I read, that might be a really good idea for you to do that. So I will have links to that below. But if you just want to listen, that's also fine. And then I'll briefly walk through what the other activities are asking you to do. I will say right away that this is a challenging text. The vocabulary is very high level. And I'm probably going to stumble over some words as I'm reading it out loud. And this is kind of my first experience making videos. So I've already tried to redo this like twice. So if I stumble over something, I'm not going to restart the video at this point. So I'm sorry if I mess up something, but I'll just keep going and it will be fine, just how it happens in class sometimes. So the title is called To Fly from Space Chronicles by Neil deGrasse Tyson. And this is what this looks like so that you can make sure you're on the right one. And this is the activity for day one, and it is by Neil deGrasse Tyson. All right, so it gives you a little background information at the top. It says background, and it says the history of human flight is closely tied to the history of speed. Flying has meant setting speed records. Heavy flying vehicles, like airplanes, have to move very quickly in order to stay in the air, and space shuttles have to travel at a very high speed called escape velocity to get into space. All right, and then it begins with sort of a quote situation from this guy named Sir Arthur Eddington. So just to know, that's like a quote. It's not the actual writer writing. And it's giving you some ancient history. So I'm at where it says 1. In ancient days, 2 aviators procured to themselves wings. Daedalus flew safely through the middle air and was duly honored in his landing. Icarus soared upwards to the sun till the wax melted which bound his wings, and his flight ended in a fiasco. In weighing their achievements, perhaps there is something to be said for Icarus. The classic authorities tell us, of course, that he was only doing a stunt, but I prefer to think of him as the man who certainly brought to light a serious constructional defect in the flying machines of his day, and we may at least hope to learn from his journey some hints to build a better machine. Sir Arthur Eddington, Stars and Atoms. And if I can figure it out, I'm going to flash up a little picture of like the drawing of Icarus, but this is from like very ancient times. People have been fascinated with wanting to fly. All right, I'm at 2. For millennia, the idea of being able to fly occupied human dreams and fantasies. Waddling around on Earth's surface as majestic birds flew overhead, perhaps we developed a form of wing envy. One might even call it wing worship. You needn't look far for evidence. For most of the history of broadcast television in America, when a station signed off for the night, it didn't show somebody walking erect and bidding farewell. Instead, it would play the Star-Spangled Banner and show things that fly, such as birds soaring or Air Force jets whooshing by. The United States even adopted a flying predator as a symbol of its strength, the bald eagle, which appears on the back of the dollar bill, the quarter, the Kennedy half dollar, the Eisenhower dollar, and the Susan B. Anthony dollar. There's also one on the top floor of the Oval Office in the White House. Our most famous superhero, Superman, can fly upon donning blue pantyhose and can fly upon donning blue pantyhose and a red cape. When you die, if you qualify, you might just become an angel, and everybody knows that angels, at least the ones who have earned their wings, can fly. Then there's the winged horse Pegasus, the wing-footed Mercury, the aerodynamically unlikely Cupid, and Peter Pan with his fairy sidekick, Tinkerbell. Our inability to fly often goes unmentioned in textbook comparison of human features with those of other species in the animal kingdom. Yet we are quick to use the word flightless as a synonym for hapless when describing such birds as the dodo and the booby, which tend to find themselves on the wrong end of evolutionary jokes. We did, however, ultimately learn to fly because of the technological ingenuity afforded by our human brains. And of course, while birds can fly, They are nonetheless stuck with bird brains, but this self-aggrandizing line of reasoning is somewhat flawed because it ignores all the millennia that we were technologically flightless. I remember as a student in junior high school reading that the famed physicist Lord Kelvin, at the turn of the 20th century, had argued the impossibility of self-propelled flight by any device that was heavier than air. Clearly, this was a myopic prediction, but one needn't have waited for the invention of the first airplanes to refute the essay's premise. One merely needed to look at birds, which have no trouble flying, and, last I checked, are all heavier than air. If something is not forbidden by the laws of physics, then it is, in principle, possible, regardless of the limits of one's technological foresight. The speed of sound in air ranges from 700 to 800 miles per hour, depending on the atmospheric temperature. No law of physics prevents objects from going faster than Mach 1, the speed of sound. But before the sound barrier was broken in 1947 by Charles E. Chuck Yeager, piloting the Bell X-1, a U.S. Army rocket plane, much claptrap was written about the impossibility of objects moving faster than the speed of sound. Meanwhile, bullets fired by high-power rifles had been breaking the sound barrier for more than a century. And the crack of a whip or the sound of a wet towel snapping at somebody's buttocks in the locker room is a mini sonic boom created by the end of the whip or the tip of the towel, moving through the air faster than the speed of sound. Any limits to breaking the sound barrier were purely psychological and technological. During its lifetime, the fastest winged aircraft by far was the Space Shuttle, which, with the aid of detachable rockets and fuel tanks, exceeded Mach 203 on its way to orbit. Propulsionless on return, it fell back out of orbit, gliding safely down to Earth. Although other craft routinely travel many times faster than the speed of sound, none can travel faster than the speed of light. I speak not from a naivety about technology's future, but from a platform built upon the laws of physics, which apply on Earth as they do in the heavens. Credit the Apollo astronauts who went to the moon with attaining the highest speeds at which humans have ever flown, about 7 miles per second at the end of the rocket burn that lifted their craft beyond low Earth orbit. This is a paltry 1/250th of 1% of the speed of light. Actually, the real problem is not the moat that separates these two speeds, but the laws of physics that prevent any object from ever achieving the speed of light, no matter how inventive your technology. The sound barrier and the light barrier are not equivalent limits on invention. The Wright brothers of Ohio, of course, generally credited with being the first in flight. At Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, as the state's license plate slogan reminds us, but this claim needs to be further delineated. Wilbur and Orville Wright were the first to fly a heavier-than-air... Liberty Bell. I lost my place. All right, I'm at paragraph 8 towards the bottom. But this claim needs to be further delineated. Wilbur and Orville Wright were the first to fly a heavier-than-air engine-powered vehicle that carried a human being. Orville, in this case, and that did not land at a lower elevation than its takeoff point. Previously, people had flown in balloon gondolas and in gliders and had executed controlled descents from the sides of cliffs. But none of these efforts would have made a bird jealous, nor would Wilbur and Orville's first trip have turned any bird heads. So I'm just going to put my dog down right now. The first of their 4 flights, a 10:35 a.m. Eastern Time on December 17, 1903, lasted 12 seconds at an average speed of 6.8 miles per hour against a 30 mile per hour wind. The Wright Flyer, as it was called, had traveled 120 feet, but even the length of the one wing on a Boeing 747. Even after the Wright brothers went public with their achievement, the media took only intermittent notice of it and other aviation's first. As late as 1933, 6 years after Lindbergh's historic solo flight across the Atlantic, H. Gordon Garbadian ignored airplanes in the otherwise prescient introduction to his book, Major Mysteries of Science. Present-day life is dominated by science as never before. You pick up a telephone, and within a few minutes, you are talking with a friend in Paris. You can travel undersea in a submarine, or circumnavigate the globe by air in a zeppelin. The radio carries your voice to all parts of the earth with the speed of light. Soon, television will enable you to see the world's greatest spectacles as you sit in the comfort of your living room. But some journalists did pay attention to the way flight might change civilization. After the Frenchman Louis Blériot, maybe it's Blériot, crossed the English Channel from Calais to Dover on July 25, 1909, an article on page 3 of the New York Times was headlined, "Frenchman Proves Airplane No Toy." The article went on to delineate England's reaction to the event. Editorials in the London newspapers buzzed about the new world where Great Britain's insular strength is no longer unchallenged. That the airplane is not a toy, but a possible instrument of warfare which must be taken into account by soldiers and statesmen, and that it was the one thing needed to wake up the English people to the importance of the science of aviation. The guy was right. 35 years later, not only had airplanes been used as fighters and bombers in warfare, but the Germans had taken the concept a notch further and invented a V-2 to attack London. Their vehicle was significant in many ways. First, it was not an airplane. It was an unprecedentedly large missile. Second, because the V-2 could be launched several hundred miles from its target, it basically birthed the modern rocket. And third, for its entire airborne journey after launch, the V-2 moved under the influence of gravity alone. In other words, it was a suborbital ballistic missile, the fastest way to deliver a bomb from one location on Earth to another. Subsequently, Cold War advances in the design of missiles enabled military power to target cities on opposite sides of the world. Maximum flight time, about 45 minutes. Not nearly enough time to evacuate a targeted city. While we can say that they're suborbital, do we have the right to declare missiles to be flying, are falling objects in flight? Is Earth flying in orbit around the sun? In keeping with these rules applied to the Wright brothers, a person must be on board the craft and it must move under its own power. But there is no rule that says that we cannot change the rules. Knowing that the V-2 brought orbital technology within reach, some people got impatient. Among them were the editors of the popular family-oriented magazine Collier's, which sent 2 journalists to join the engineers, scientists, and visionaries gathered at New York City's Hayden Planetarium on Columbus Day, 1951, for its seminal space travel symposium. In the March 22, 1952 issue of Collier's, in a piece titled, "What Are We Waiting For?", the magazine endorsed the need for the value of a space station that would serve as a watchful eye over a divided world. In the hands of the West, a space station permanently established beyond the atmosphere would be the greatest hope for peace the world has ever known. No nation could undertake preparations for the war without the certain knowledge that it was being observed by the ever-watching eyes aboard the Sentinel in space. It would be the end of the Iron Curtains whenever they might be. We Americans didn't build a space station. Instead, we went to the moon. With this effort, our wing worship continued. Never mind that Apollo astronauts landed on the airless moon, where wings are completely useless, and a lunar module named after a bird. A mere 65 years, 7 months, 3 days, 5 hours, and 43 minutes after Orville left the ground, Neil Armstrong gave his first statement from the moon's surface. "Houston, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed." The human record for altitude does not go to anybody for having walked on the moon. It goes to the astronauts of the ill-fated Apollo 13. Knowing that they could not land on the moon after the explosion in their oxygen tank, and knowing that they did not have enough fuel to stop, slow down, and head back, they executed a single-figure 8 ballistic trajectory around the moon, swinging them back towards Earth. The moon just happened to be I think this is Apogee. I am not sure how to pronounce it, which still happens to me sometimes, guys. So I'm just going to move forward, and I will look up the definition for Apogee or Apogee. I'm not quite sure how you say it. The farthest point from Earth in its elliptical orbit. No other Apollo mission, before or since, went to the moon during Apogee. Okay, now I'm seeing via context clues what the definition of this word means, and it is the farthest point from Earth in its elliptical orbit, which granted the Apollo 13 astronauts the human altitude record. After calculating that they must have reached about 245,000 miles above Earth's surface, including the orbital distance from the moon's surface, I asked Apollo 13 Commander Jim Lovell, who was on the far side of the command module as it rounded the moon. That single person would hold the altitude record. He refused to tell. In my opinion, the greatest achievement of flight was not Wilbur and Orville's aeroplane, nor Chuck Yeager's breaking of the sound barrier, nor the Apollo 11 lunar landing. For me, it was the launch of Voyager 2, which ballistically toured the solar system's outer planets. During the flybys, the spacecraft's slingshot trajectory stole a little of Jupiter's and Saturn's orbital energy to enable its rapid exit from the solar system. Upon passing Jupiter in 1979, Voyager's speed exceeded 40,000 miles an hour, sufficient to escape the gravitational attraction of even the Sun. Voyager passed the orbit of Pluto in 1993 and has now entered the realm of interstellar space. Nobody happens to be on board the craft, but a gold phonograph record attached to its side is etched with the earthly sounds of, among other things, the human heartbeat. So with our heart, if not our soul, we fly even farther. All right, so I have read it. I guess it only took 15 minutes. Felt longer. So what it wants you to do now is do some comprehension activities. And these are just simple questions. They're at the bottom here, and then they're on the back here. And they're asking you some questions about what he meant. And then they're asking you to create a timeline where you kind of go back through the article and you put things in time order of when the people flew for the first time, so on and so forth. You could also research some details from the text. There was a lot of information in there, and unless you are like a super space nerd, you maybe didn't know what all of those things meant. I certainly didn't. So if there's a part that you want to research, it kind of is giving you that prompt there. All right, day 2 is a close read. If you wanted to, you could play this amazing video that I have made. You could play it again and pause it and sort of answer these questions. Day 3 is for you to analyze the craft and structure of the piece of writing. And it gives you some definitions of what it means here. It first talks about expository writing. Expository is what we always call informative. I don't know why they are using the word expository, but it kind of just means explanatory or informational. All of those words mean the same thing. Allusions are references to well-known people, places, characters, myths, and events, and blah, blah, blah. So whenever he, talks about something and you're like, I don't know who that person is and I don't know what they have to do with anything, like when he talks about Icarus, that's an allusion to a myth. Compare and contrast, I think you would know, but it's when you're looking at similarities and differences between two things. Description and cause and effect, I also think you would know. But then it asks you questions about what allusions he makes, what he compares and contrasts, how he describes things. Neil deGrasse Tyson is a very famous writer about things like space, and he is quite a good writer. I mean, it's dense, but he's very good. Day 4 is concept vocabulary, and it just kind of asks you to annotate on the page what the words mean in these definitions. And then it asks you a few more questions. And then, all right, day 5 is the writing task. And guys, I'm going to post this graphic organizer, but bigger. And if that's all you do, I would still love to see that, because I think that when you fill out these graphic organizers, you do most of the argumentative thinking. And this prompt is a little bit confusing at first glance, but it is very interesting. So at the very end of that reading, they talked about how on the space shuttle, they have a record, like a record you'd play in a record player, maybe, that has sounds from Earth recorded on it. And what the prompt is asking you to do is to choose a sound that you think should be added to that record. and that could be any sound. So that could be like any sound that like could be like a conversation of people talking. It could be a song. It could be like a sound recording of a TV show. It could be any sound that you think should be put on that record. And um, I think the purpose of the record is like kind of about aliens. I'm not 100% sure about this. Um, but it's kind of like it's kind of like making like a time capsule, maybe a little bit. It's like if you had to pick one thing that you thought really could represent Earth and humanity, what sound would you pick and why? And so you've got to think of 3 reasons why and then like give some evidence to support those reasons. And you can do that by filling out the graphic organizer that I'm going to link below. And please send it to me because I think it'd be really interesting to know what sound it is that you would want to add. So you could add like a dog barking, or you could add like your favorite song. So kind of think about it and at least fill out the graphic organizer and send that to me. I will be posting new videos next week, something to look forward to. And I really do miss you guys. I miss seeing your faces. I miss being in class and doing our normal thing. But I don't make the calls, and we are in a strange situation right now. So hopefully you can still, keep up with your studies and be working on things even from home. Yeah, I'm sorry that this video is kind of awkward, but it's the first video I've made since I was in high school, I think, so yeah. All right. Okay, goodbye.